The full moon hung heavy over Blackthorn territory, casting silver light across the ceremonial grounds where the entire pack had gathered. Ancient stones formed a circle around the sacred space, each one carved with symbols that predated memory, each one bearing witness to countless mate bond ceremonies throughout the generations. Tonight, those stones would witness something far different. Caden Blackthorn stood at the center of the circle, his powerful frame radiating authority that made even the strongest wolves lower their eyes. As alpha of the Blackthorn Pack, he had transformed their territory from a struggling outpost into one of the most formidable packs in the Northern Territories. His reputation preceded him, ruthless in battle, cunning in strategy, fair in judgment. At 28, he commanded respect that some alphas twice his age could never achieve. His dark hair caught the moonlight, and his gray eyes surveyed the assembled pack with the confidence of a wolf who had never known defeat. The pack elders stood to his right, their weathered faces solemn as they prepared to conduct the ceremony. To his left, his beta Marcus watched with barely concealed concern. The entire pack had felt it when the mate bond snapped into place. 3 days ago, the sudden mate. Excitement had rippled through the territory. The Blackthorn Pack would finally have their Luna. Then Caden had discovered who the moon goddess had chosen for him. Sarah Whitlock stepped into the circle, and a hushed murmur swept through the crowd. She moved with quiet grace, her head slightly bowed in the posture expected of an Omega. Her long dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, partially obscuring her face. She wore a simple white dress, traditional for the ceremony, but on her it seemed almost mockingly plain. No family stood behind her to present her to the pack. No lineage of note preceded her name. She had appeared in Blackthorn territory 3 years ago, a lone wolf seeking refuge, and had been granted the lowest position in the pack hierarchy. An Omega. The moon goddess had paired him with an Omega. Caden felt the mate bond thrumming between them, an invisible thread that pulled at something deep in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to go to her, to claim her, to complete the bond that nature itself had forged. His wolf snarled and paced within him, desperate to accept what fate had provided. But Caden had not built his pack's strength by following blind instinct. He had done so through calculated decisions and unwavering standards. The head elder, Thomas Grayman, stepped forward and raised his hands. Silence fell over the gathering like a blanket. The ancient wolf's voice carried across the ceremony of years, invoking the moon goddess and the sacred bond she bestowed upon her children. Sarah stood perfectly still, her eyes downcast, her breathing steady. Only Caden, standing close enough to feel the pull of their connection, noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled almost imperceptibly at her sides. When the elder finished his invocation, tradition dictated that the alpha would step forward, offer his hand, and speak the words of acceptance. The mate bond would complete, and the pack would celebrate their new Luna. Caden stepped forward, but the words that left his lips shattered tradition like glass. His voice rang out clear and cold across the sacred ground, declaring before the moon goddess and every member of his pack that he rejected the bond. He spoke of duty and strength, of the requirements of a Luna, who would stand beside an alpha of his standing. He listed the qualities necessary for such a position: power, lineage, proven capability. His words cut through the night air like blades, each one carefully chosen to establish the impossibility of accepting an Omega as his mate. Sarah finally raised her eyes to meet his, and for a moment, Caden felt something shift in the air around them. Her eyes were an unusual shade of amber, flecked with gold that seemed to catch and hold the moonlight. In their depths, he saw no tears, no pleading, none of the devastation he had expected. Instead, something ancient stirred behind her gaze, something that made his wolf suddenly that moment. The mate bond flared between them with such intensity that Caden felt it like a physical blow. His rejection should have severed the connection, or at least weakened it. Instead, it snapped fully into place, complete and unbreakable, even as he spoke words meant to destroy it. Agony lanced through his chest, white hot and unexpected. Caden's breath caught, and he barely maintained his composure before the watching pack. The pain was unlike anything he had experienced in battle, in challenge, in any of the trials that had forged him into the alpha he had become. It felt as though something vital was being torn from inside him, as though his very soul was being cleaved in two. Sarah's expression never changed. She stood tall despite her Omega designation, her spine straight, her chin lifted with a dignity that seemed incongruous with her station. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, carrying to every wolf present. She accepted his rejection with words that were proper and formal, acknowledging his right as alpha to choose his own path. She thanked him for the shelter his pack had provided, and she released him from any obligation the mate bond might have created. Her words were perfect, humble, exactly what an Omega should say when rejected by an Alpha. But as she spoke, her eyes flashed with something that made the hair on the back of Caden's neck stand up. For just an instant, power radiated from her like heat from a forge, ancient, vast, and barely contained. The air around her seemed to shim, conscious minds couldn't quite identify. Then it was gone, so quickly that Caden almost thought he had imagined it. Sarah bowed, the gesture fluid and controlled, and turned to leave the circle. As she walked away, her white dress ghosting around her ankles, Caden felt the mate bond stretch between them like a living thing. It did not break, it did not fade. Instead, it settled into his chest like a hook buried deep, incomplete, but utterly unbreakable, a constant reminder of what he had just refused. The pack stood in stunned silence as Sarah disappeared into the darkness beyond the ceremonial grounds. No one seemed to know how to react to what they had just witnessed. Rejections were rare but not unheard of, yet never had anyone seen one conducted with such cold formality, and never had the rejected mate walked away with such unsettling composure. Caden remained in the center of the circle, his hands clenched at his sides, fighting against the pain that continued to radiate through his chest. His wolf howled within him, raging against what he had done, clawing to be released so it could chase after their mate and make this right. But Caden Blackthorn did not make mistakes, and he did not second-guess his decisions. He had rejected Sarah Whitlock because she was beneath his station, unworthy of standing beside him as Luna of the Blackthorn Pack. So why did it? Feel as though he had just made the gravest error of his life. As the pack slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves, Marcus approached with careful steps. The beta's expression was troubled, his eyes against Caden's skin, and the moon above seemed to dim, as though even the moon goddess herself disapproved of what had transpired in her sacred circle. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a sound of mourning that echoed across the territory and made something deep in Caden's chest twist with unexpected regret. The days following the rejection ceremony passed in an unsettling quiet that permeated Blackthorn territory like morning fog. Caden threw himself into pack business with renewed intensity, determined to prove that his decision had been correct, that his focus remained uncompromised. Yet the mate bond pulsed constantly beneath his ribs, a reminder that refused to fade, growing stronger rather than weaker as time passed. The first strange occurrence happened on the third night. The Crimson Fang Pack, longtime rivals who had been testing Blackthorn borders for months, suddenly withdrew their scouts. Their alpha sent a terse message citing internal matters, but Marcus reported that their warriors had fled in disarray, as though something had terrified them beyond reason. Caden ordered patrols doubled, suspecting a trap, but the borders remained eerily peaceful. Then the territory itself began to change. The weakest section of their northern boundary, where the wards had been failing despite repeated reinforcement attempts, suddenly stabilized. The pack's ward specialist, an elderly wolf named Helena, examined the boundary stones with increasing confusion woven with techniques she did not recognize. The energy signature felt ancient, she said, like something from the old bloodlines that had faded generations ago. Caden's nightmares, which had plagued him since he took the alpha position 5 years ago, ceased entirely. He had grown accustomed to waking in the dark hours before dawn, his sheets soaked with sweat, visions of blood and failure still vivid behind his eyes. The dreams had been his constant companion, a price he paid for the weight of leadership. Now he slept deeply, dreamlessly, and woke feeling more rested than he had in years. The absence of the nightmares disturbed him more than their presence ever had. Marcus noticed it first. The beta had always been observant, reading patterns that others missed, and he approached Caden in his office on the 5th day after the rejection with information that made the alpha's wolf stir with sudden attention. The beta reported that Sarah had been disappearing into the forest each night, leaving the pack house well after midnight and not returning until just before dawn. Marcus had assigned a tracker to follow her, but the wolf had lost her trail within minutes, as though she had simply vanished into the shadows themselves. More concerning were the energy readings Helena had detected, powerful magical signatures emanating from deep within the forest, in the same direction Sarah traveled. Caden dismissed Marcus with instructions to continue monitoring the situation, but the information burrowed under his skin like a splinter. That night he found himself standing midnight. A slender figure emerged from the pack house and moved toward the forest with purposeful strides. Even from a distance he recognized her. His wolf demanded he follow, and for once Caden did not argue. He tracked her through the forest, maintaining enough distance that she should not detect him, using every skill he had honed over years of hunting. Sarah moved through the darkness with uncanny confidence, never hesitating, never stumbling, as though she could see perfectly, despite the heavy canopy that blocked the moonlight. She walked for nearly an hour, penetrating deep into the wildest section of Blackthorn territory, where even experienced wolves rarely ventured. Then she stopped in a clearing Caden had never seen before, despite knowing every inch of his territory. Ancient trees surrounded the space, their trunks wider than 3 wolves, standing side by side, their branches forming a cathedral ceiling overhead. Moonlight filtered through in silver shafts, illuminating a circle of stones that predated even the ceremonial grounds near the pack house. Sarah stood in the center of the clearing and raised her hands. What happened next made Caden's breath catch in his throat. Power erupted from her like a dam break-in, flooding the clearing with energy so intense that Caden felt it from his hiding place 30 yards away. The air shimmered and bent around her, and her eyes blazed with golden light that had nothing to do with a normal wolf's glow. She moved through a series of protective wards she was weaving were visible to Caden's alpha sight, intricate patterns of light and shadow that spread outward from the clearing like a vast web, extending toward the pack's borders. She was reinforcing Blackthorn's defenses. She had been doing it every night since the rejection. Caden watched, transfixed, as Sarah worked with a skill and power that defied everything he thought he knew about her. This was no Omega. The energy radiating from her spoke of alpha bloodlines, strong and pure, the kind that had not been seen in generations. Her movements held the confidence of someone who had trained extensively in the old magic, the ancient arts that most modern packs had forgotten. When she finally lowered her hands, the wards settled into place, invisible but palpable, strengthening the territory's defenses in ways that would take Blackthorn specialists weeks to achieve. Sarah swayed slightly, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders, but she remained standing. She pulled a small knife from her belt and made a precise cut across her palm, letting 3 drops of blood fall onto the central stone. The blood sizzled and disappeared, and Caden felt the wards lock into place with a resonance that thrummed through his alpha connection to the land. Blood magic. She was binding the wards with her own life force, a technique so dangerous that most wolves refused to attempt it. Caden remained frozen in his hiding place as Sarah turned to leave the clearing for one hard hymn, but she simply wrapped her hand in a strip of cloth and walked back toward the pack house, her steps heavy with fatigue. He did not follow her back. Instead, he remained in the clearing until dawn, trying to reconcile what he had witnessed with the meek Omega who worked in the pack house kitchens. Over the following days, Caden found himself watching Sarah with new eyes. He observed her during pack meals, noting details he had previously dismissed. The younger wolves gravitated toward her, seeking her quiet counsel. She moved through the pack house with an economy of motion that spoke of extensive training. When she thought no one was looking, her posture changed, her spine straightened, her chin lifted, and something commanding flickered across her features before she schooled them back into careful neutrality. He caught glimpses of scars on her wrists when her sleeves rode up during her work, marks that suggested she had once worn silver shackles. Silver poisoning left distinctive scars, and the pattern on her skin indicated prolonged exposure, the kind that came from imprisonment rather than accident. The mate bond pulled at him constantly, growing more insistent rather than fading as he had expected. At night, he dreamed of amber eyes and ancient power, of a woman who was far more than she appeared. His wolf had stopped raging at him and instead watched him with something like disappointment, as though waiting for Caden to see what should have been obvious from the beginning. The attack came on the 8th night after the rejection. Rogues hit. He rallied his warriors and met the threat head-on, his wolf reveling in the clarity of battle after days of confusion and doubt. The fighting was fierce, the rogues displaying unusual discipline and strength. Caden tore through them with brutal efficiency, but there were too many, and they kept coming in waves. He caught sight of Sarah near the pack house, helping evacuate the non-combatants, and something in his chest eased knowing she was safe. Then the largest wave of rogues broke through the defensive line, heading straight for the pack house. Caden roared orders, trying to redirect his warriors, but they were too far away. The rogues would reach the building before his wolves could intercept them. Sarah stood in their path, alone, still dressed in her kitchen clothes. Caden's heart stopped as he watched the rogues descend upon her, certain he was about to witness her death. He ran toward her, knowing he would not reach her in time, feeling the mate bond scream in his chest. Then Sarah moved, and the world seemed to slow. She flowed like water, like shadow, like something that existed between one heartbeat and the next. The first rogue never saw her strike. He simply collapsed, his throat torn out with surgical precision. The second and third fell before they could react, and then Sarah was among them like a force of nature. Her movements too fast to follow, too deadly to counter. Golden light blazed from her eyes, and power rolled undeniable, her strength unmasked and terrible to behold. The rogues began to retreat, their earlier discipline shattering into panic. Those who got close enough to see her face clearly started screaming, their voices raw with terror. One word echoed across the battlefield, spoken by a dozen rogue voices before they fled into the forest. Silver Shadow. Within minutes, every rogue had vanished, leaving behind their dead and wounded in their desperate flight. Caden's warriors stood in stunned silence, staring at the slight figure of Sarah Whitlock, who stood amid the carnage without a scratch on her, her eyes still blazing with golden fire. Then she seemed to notice the attention, and the light faded from her eyes. Her shoulders slumped back into their customary position, and she looked down at her blood-stained hands with an expression Caden could not read. Without a word, she turned and walked back into the pack house, leaving a battlefield full of warriors who suddenly questioned everything they thought they knew. Caden stood frozen, his mind reeling. The Silver Shadow. He had heard that name before, whispered in the same breath as legends and ghost stories. A phantom warrior who had appeared across various territories over the past decade, turning the tide of impossible battles, vanishing before anyone could identify them. Some said the Silver Shadow was a myth. Others claimed it was a spirit sent by the moon goddess herself. No one had suggested it might be an Omega working in the Blackthorn Pack house kid speak to give orders to make sense of what they had all witnessed. But Caden had no words. He could only stare at the pack house where Sarah had disappeared, feeling the mate bond pulse with new intensity, as though it was laughing at his earlier certainty. He had rejected her as unworthy. He had dismissed her as beneath his station. He had declared her inadequate to stand beside him as Luna, and she had been protecting his pack, strengthening his borders, and hiding a power that made his own alpha abilities seem ordinary by comparison. What else had he been blind to? What else had he been blind to? What other truths had his pride prevented him from seeing? The questions haunted him as he organized the cleanup and tended to his wounded warriors. Dawn was breaking when he finally returned to the pack house, exhausted and covered in blood, his mind still churning with revelations that refused to settle into coherent thought. He needed answers. He needed to understand who Sarah Whitlock truly was and why she had hidden in his pack for 3 years, pretending to be something she clearly was not. But first, he needed to confront the uncomfortable truth that his rejection had been based on ignorance and assumption, on surface appearances rather than genuine understanding. He had prided himself on being a fair and perceptive alpha, yet he had failed to see what had been right in front of him. The mate bond thrummed insistently in his chest, no longer just a reminder of his rejection, but a demand for acknowledgement. Somewhere in the pack house, Sarah was probably washing blood from her hands and preparing to return to her kitchen duties slow, and he could not unsee it. The silver shadow walked among his pack, and she was his fated mate, the one he had rejected with such certainty just 8 days ago. Caden found her 3 nights later in the forest, in the same ancient clearing where he had first witnessed her working the wards. He had not planned the confrontation, had spent the intervening days trying to formulate the right approach, the proper words, but watching her slip from the pack house again, moving through shadows like she belonged to them, something in him snapped. His wolf surged forward, demanding answers, demanding truth, and for once Caden did not restrain it. She knew he was there before he entered the clearing. Her posture shifted, tension flowing through her shoulders, even as she continued her work, hands weaving patterns of light and shadow through the air. The wards hummed around them, responding to her touch with an eagerness that spoke of recognition, of ancient power, calling to ancient power. Caden stepped into the moonlight, and Sarah's hands stilled. She did not turn to face him, but he saw her spine straighten, saw the careful mask of submission fall away like a discarded cloak. When she finally turned, the woman who met his gaze bore little resemblance to the Omega who served meals in his pack house. Her amber eyes blazed, every inch of her radiating the authority of an alpha, not the borrowed authority of rank, but the inherent dominance that came from bloodline, from breeding, from something written into the very marrow of her bones. The mate bond flared between them with such intensity that Caden staggered. Pain lanced through his chest, white hot and merciless, the incomplete bond screaming at the proximity of its other half. He saw Sarah flinch, saw her hand press against her ribs, and knew she felt it too. This agonizing pull toward completion, this torture of being so, close to what they were meant to be while remaining fundamentally severed. His voice came out rougher than intended, demanding to know who she really was, what she was hiding, why she had deceived his pack. The questions tumbled out, 3 years of assumptions crumbling in the face of what he had witnessed, the silver shadow, the ancient magic, the power that no Omega could possibly possess. Sarah regarded him with an expression that held no fear, only a weariness that seemed to age her beyond her years. She asked what he thought he knew, what he believed he had discovered. Her voice carried none of the soft deference she used in the pack house. Instead, it resonated with command, with the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Caden listed what he had seen, the wards, the battle, the terror in the rogues' eyes when they recognized her. He spoke of the silver shadow, of the legends that had circulated through voice, the one that compelled submission from every wolf in his pack. Sarah laughed, and the sound held no humor. She informed him that his alpha voice held no power over her, that it never had, that she had only pretended to submit because it suited her purposes. Because it suited her purposes, the revelation struck him like a physical blow. Every interaction they had ever had suddenly took on new meaning. She had been choosing to appear subservient, had been acting a role while he remained oblivious to the performance. The mate bond pulsed again, and this time Caden could not suppress the groan that escaped him. The pain was intensifying. fed by their proximity, by the power rolling off Sarah in waves. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, something had shifted in her expression. A decision made, a wall coming down. She began to speak, and her words rewrote everything. Caden thought he understood about the woman standing before him. The Whitlock name, she told him, should have meant something to him if he knew his pack histories. 3 decades ago, the Whitlock line had been the most powerful alpha family in the Northern Territories. They had ruled over lands that dwarfed Blackthorn territory, had commanded respect from every pack within 1,000 miles. The Whitlock Alphas were legendary for their strength, their magic, their ability to command not just wolves, but the very elements themselves. Sarah's voice remained steady as she described her family. Parents who could call storms had been so vast that other alphas traveled from distant territories just to seek her counsel. The Whitlock Pack had been a beacon of strength and stability, a force that maintained balance across multiple territories. Then came the massacre. Her voice finally wavered as she described the night her world ended. She had been 16, still learning to control her emerging alpha abilities, still training in the ancient magics that were her birthright. The attack came without warning, coordinated, brutal, executed with a precision that spoke of extensive planning. The Shadowfang Covenant, an organization Caden had heard whispered about but never truly believed existed, descended upon Whitlock territory like a plague. They killed everyone. Her parents, her siblings, her extended family, every wolf who carried Whitlock blood. They burned the pack house, salted the earth, destroyed every trace of the Whitlock legacy. Sarah survived only because her mother had hidden her in a secret chamber beneath the house, sealed with blood magic so powerful that even the Covenant's hunters could not detect it. She spent 3 days in that chamber, listening to her family die. Above her, feeling their deaths through the pack bonds until each connection snapped like a severed rope. When she finally emerged, she found nothing but ash and blood. Bodies left to rot as a message to anyone who might think to challenge the Covenant's power. Caden listened in growing horror, his earlier anger transforming into something else entirely. He had heard stories of pack massacre Whitlock line had been erased from existence, their very name becoming a ghost story that most younger wolves did not even recognize. Sarah continued, describing the years that followed. She had been a 16-year-old alpha female, one of the rarest manifestations of werewolf genetics, with power that marked her as clearly as a beacon. The Covenant had hunters specifically tasked with tracking down any Whitlock survivors, determined to ensure the bloodline ended completely. She could not hide as herself, could not let her true nature show. So she had done the impossible. She had suppressed her alpha nature, forcing it down into the deepest parts of herself, binding it with magic and sheer willpower until even other alphas could not detect it. She made herself appear as an omega, the lowest rank, the one that drew no attention, inspired no suspicion. It was agony, she said, like trying to contain a wildfire in a paper box, but it kept her alive. For 12 years, she had wandered from territory to territory, never staying long enough to form connections, always moving before anyone could look too closely. She had learned to fight in secret, to use her magic only when absolutely necessary, to be invisible even while standing in plain sight. The silver shadow had been born from necessity. There were battles she could not ignore, injustices she could not abide, And in those moments, she allowed herself to be what she truly was, just long enough to make a difference before disappearing again. 3 years ago, she had come to Blackthorn territory exhausted and desperate. The constant suppression of her nature was killing her slowly, and she needed a place to rest, to recover, to simply exist without constantly looking over her shoulder. Caden's pack had a reputation for being strong, but fair, for accepting wolves from other territories without excessive questions. She had thought she could hide here for a while, regain her strength, then move on before anyone discovered her secret. Then the mate bond had snapped into place and everything had changed. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper as she described feeling the bond form, the hope that had surged through her despite years of carefully maintained emotional distance. A mate was supposed to be a gift from the moon goddess, a partner who would understand and accept you completely. For just a moment, she had allowed herself to believe that perhaps her years of running were over, that perhaps she had finally found somewhere she could belong. Caden's rejection had shattered that hope, but she admitted it had also been almost a relief. The mate bond would have eventually revealed her true nature. There was no hiding from a completed bond. His rejection, painful as it was, allowed her to maintain her disguise, to stay hidden just a little longer, but she could not stop protecting his pack. The mate bond, incomplete as it was, still connected her to Blackthorn territory in ways she had not anticipated. She felt the weaknesses in the borders, sensed to ignore them. So she had continued her nightly work, strengthening the wards, reinforcing the defenses, doing what she could to keep the pack safe even. Though they did not know she existed beyond her role in the kitchens, the words hung in the air between them, and Caden felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Everything he had believed about Sarah, every assumption he had made, had been catastrophically wrong. She was not an omega at all. She was an alpha female, a manifestation so rare that most packs went generations without seeing one. More than that, she was the last surviving member of one of the most powerful bloodlines in werewolf history. He had rejected her. He had stood in the sacred circle and declared her unworthy, had dismissed her as beneath his station, had treated her like she was nothing. The mate bond pulsed with renewed intensity, and this time the pain drove him to his knees. Sarah moved toward him, instinctively, then stopped herself, her hand outstretched, but not quite touching him. The incomplete bond screamed at the proximity, demanding completion, demanding acknowledgement. Caden forced himself to his feet, pride warring with the growing realization of his mistake. He demanded proof, some demonstration that her story was true, even though every instinct told him she was not lying. Perhaps he needed to see it, to witness the full extent of what he had rejected, to understand the magnitude of his error. Sarah's expression hardened, and she stepped back. She warned him that she had spent 12 years hiding her true nature, that releasing it even partially was, he insisted on, proof. She would give it to him. She raised her hands, and the world transformed. Power erupted from her like a tidal wave, flooding the clearing with energy so intense that Caden felt it pressing against his skin like a physical force. The air itself seemed to bend and warp around her, and her eyes blazed with golden lights so bright it rivaled the moon above. The ancient trees surrounding the clearing bowed toward her, their branches rustling in a wind that touched nothing else. The earth beneath their feet responded to her call, trembling and shifting. Stones rose from the ground, hovering in the air round her in a perfect circle, each one glowing with the same golden light that emanated from her eyes. Water condensed from the air itself, forming intricate patterns that wove between the floating stones. Fire danced along her fingertips, controlled and precise, never spreading beyond where she directed it. She was commanding the elements themselves, bending the fundamental forces of nature to her will, with an ease that spoke of extensive training and inherent power. This was magic from the old bloodlines, abilities that most modern wolves believed had faded from the world. Yet here stood Sarah Whitlock, the last of her line, demonstrating powers that made Caden's own alpha abilities seem ordinary by comparison. The display lasted only moments, but it felt like an eternity. When Sarah finally lowered her hands, the stones settled gently back to earth, the water dissipated, and the fire extinguished. The golden light faded from her eyes, leaving them their normal amber, and shipping her arms, and the mate bond exploded between them with such force that they both cried out, "Ix, Ix." This close, with her power still humming beneath her skin, and his alpha nature responding to hers, the incomplete bond became almost unbearable. It was like standing in a fire, like being torn apart and stitched back together simultaneously. Agony and ecstasy so intertwined they became indistinguishable. Sarah pulled away from him, stumbling backward, her hand pressed against her chest. She told him he had his. Proof that he now knew what she was, what she had been hiding. Her voice was raw, exhausted, stripped of the careful control she usually maintained. Caden stared at her, his mind reeling. His rejection suddenly felt like the gravest mistake of his life, a moment of pride and prejudice that had cost him something irreplaceable. But even as regret surged through him, his pride reared up, refusing to let him admit the error, refusing to acknowledge that he had been so catastrophically wrong. Before he could formulate a response, before he could find words adequate to the moment, a howl split the night air. It came from the direction of the pack house, carrying a tone that made every wolf's blood run cold, the warning of an attack, of enemies at the gates. Marcus's voice followed, projected through the alpha link with urgent intensity. The message made Caden's blood freeze in his veins. The Shadowfang Covenant had found them. They were here for Sarah, and the forest exploded into chaos as Caden and Sarah raced back toward the pack house, the mate bond, pulling them forward in synchronized urgency. Through the Alpha Link, Marcus's reports flooded Caden's mind in rapid succession. Dozens of attackers, coordinated assault, professional execution. These were not rogues testing borders. This was an army. They burst from the tree line to find Blackthorn territory transformed into a battlefield. Fires burned across the compound, casting dancing shadows that made it impossible to track individual combatants. The Shadowfang Covenant had brought overwhelming force, their warriors moving with military precision that spoke of extensive training and singular purpose. They wore dark armor marked with a symbol Caden had only seen in ancient texts, a wolf's head split by a blade, representing their mission to eliminate powerful bloodlines. Caden's warriors fought valiantly, but they were being systematically overwhelmed. The Covenant fighters moved in coordinated units, targeting the strongest wolves first, using silver weapons that burned on contact and tactics designed to neutralize alpha advantages. Bodies littered the ground, both Blackthorn wolves and Covenant soldiers, the metallic scent of blood thick enough to taste. Marcus appeared at Caden's side, his face grim and streaked with blood. The Beta's report was devastating. They were outnumbered 3-1. The Covenant had breached the inner defenses, and their commander had made their objective crystal clear. They wanted Sarah Whitlock alive, and they would burn Blackthorn territory to ash to claim her. Caden felt rage ignite in his chest, primal and absolute. His wolf surged forward, demanding blood, demanding protection of what was his. The mate bond amplified the fury, feeding his alpha nature until he felt like he might explode from the pressure. They wanted his mate. They had come into his territory, attacked his pack, threatened his wolves, all to claim the woman the moon goddess herself had chosen for him. His voice, when it emerged, carried the full weight of his alpha command, resonating across the battlefield with enough force to make even the Covenant soldiers pause. He declared that Sarah Whitlock was under his protection, that she belonged to Blackthorn Pack, that anyone who wanted her would have to go through him first. The rejection he had pronounced 8 days ago might as well have never happened in this moment, with enemies at his gates and the mate bond screaming in his chest. Caden finally acknowledged what he should have accepted from the beginning. She was his, mate bond or not. Completed or rejected, she was his to protect. Sarah stood beside him, and when he glanced at her, he saw the careful mask had completely shattered. Power radiated from her in visible waves, her eyes blazing with golden fire, her entire being transformed into something magnificent and terrible. This was no Omega, no hidden survivor trying to remain invisible. This was an alpha female in her full glory, and the sight of her made something in Caden's chest tighten with emotions he could not name. She told him she would not hide anymore, that she was done running. Her voice carried across the battlefield, and Caden heard the ancient power in it, the authority of bloodlines that predated most modern packs. If the Covenant wanted her, they would face what the Whitlock line had been before they were massacred. They would face the storm they had tried so desperately to extinguish. Then she moved, and the battle transformed. Sarah flowed into the combat like liquid death, her movements too fast to follow, too precise to counter. She tore through Covenant soldiers with an efficiency that made Caden's own fighting style seem crude by comparison. Golden light blazed around her, and where she passed, the earth itself responded, roots erupting to entangle enemies, stones rising to block attacks, the very air seeming to fight alongside her. Caden's warriors, who had been struggling against the overwhelming numbers, suddenly found themselves fighting beside a legend. The Silver Shadow was no longer a ghost story, whispered around fires. She was real. She was here. And she was defending Blackthorn territory with a ferocity that inspired every wolf who witnessed it. Caden fought his way to her side, his wolf demanding he protect his mate even as his rational mind recognized she needed no protection. They fell into a rhythm without conscious thought, the incomplete mate bond synchronizing their movements in ways that should have been impossible. He knew where she would be before she moved, felt her intentions through the connection between them, and she responded to his presence with the same instinctive coordination. They were devastating together. Caden's raw alpha strength combined with Sarah's supernatural speed and elemental magic created a partnership that the Covenant soldiers could not counter. Back to back, they carved through the enemy forces, protecting each other's blind spots, moving as though they had trained together for years rather than fighting side by side for the first time. Through the chaos, Caden caught glimpses of what they could be together. Not Alpha and Luna in the traditional sense, but two equal forces united, complementing each other's strengths, covering each other's weaknesses. The mate bond sang between them, no longer just pain and regret, but potential, possibility, a preview of what completion might offer. The Covenant commander emerged from the smoke, a massive wolf with silver-streaked fur and eyes that held cold calculation. He was ancient, Caden realized, old enough to have participated in the original Whitlock massacre, experienced enough to recognize exactly what he faced. The commander's voice carried across the battlefield as he called for his soldiers to fall back, to regroup, to implement contingency protocols. They had not expected Sarah to reveal herself. They had not anticipated an alpha female at full power, supported by an entire pack. The commander's orders shifted from capture to elimination. If they could not take her alive, they would ensure she died here, ending the Whitlock line permanently. Fresh. Waves of Covenant soldiers poured into the territory, and Caden realized with sinking certainty that this had been planned as a siege, not a raid. They had brought enough forces to overwhelm even a prepared pack, and Blackthorn had been caught off guard. His warriors were exhausted, wounded, being slowly ground down by superior numbers and professional tactics. Sarah felt it too. Through the mate bond, Caden sensed her awareness of the shifting tide, her calculation of odds and outcomes. She was preparing for something, gathering power in a way that made the air around her crackle with energy. He recognized the signs of a major working, the kind of magic that required enormous reserves and carried significant cost. He tried to tell her to stop, that they would find another way, but she was not listening. Her focus had narrowed to singular purpose, and through the bond he felt her determination, her acceptance of what she was about to do. She would not let Blackthorn Pack fall because of her, would not allow more wolves to die protecting her secret. The Covenant commander led the next charge personally, targeting Sarah with a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm even her considerable abilities. A dozen soldiers moved in perfect synchronization, silver weapons flashing, cutting off escape routes and forcing her into an increasingly smaller defensive space. Caden roared and tried to reach her, but more soldiers blocked his path, separating them with deliberate precision. Through the mate bond, he felt her spike of alarm, felt her recognize the trap closing around her. The commander struck with a blade that gleamed with more than just silver. Poison coated the edge, something designed specifically to incapacitate powerful wolves. Time seemed to slow as Caden watched the sick, poisoned blade arc toward Sarah's exposed side. He screamed her name, his wolf howling in anguish, the mate bond shrieking, a warning that came too late. Sarah could have dodged, could have saved herself, but her eyes met Caden's across the battlefield, and something passed between them through the bond, understanding, acceptance, choice. She moved, but not away from the blade. Instead, she threw herself forward, intercepting an attack that had been aimed at Caden, a strike he had not seen coming from his blind side. The poisoned blade meant for him buried itself in her shoulder instead, and Sarah's cry of pain lanced through Caden's chest like he had been stabbed himself. The incomplete mate bond exploded with agony so intense that Caden's vision went white. He felt her pain as though it was his own, felt the poison spreading through her system, felt her strength beginning to fail. It was worse than anything he had experienced during the rejection, worse than any wound he had ever sustained. The bond, incomplete as it was, still connected them deeply enough that her suffering became his suffering, her mortality suddenly, terrifyingly real. Rage consumed him, primal and absolute. His wolf took complete control, and Caden became something beyond rational thought, beyond strategy or restraint. He was Alpha incarnate, fury given form, and he tore through the Covenant soldiers like they were made of paper. The commander tried to stand against him and died screaming, his throat crushed in Caden's jaws before he could raise his weapon. The remaining Covenant forces broke and ran, their discipline shattering in the face of an Alpha who had lost all restraint, all mercy. Caden pursued them to the borders and beyond, making sure they understood that Blackthorn territory was death for anyone who threatened what was his. Only when the last soldier had fled or fallen did his wolf finally release control, leaving Caden standing amid the carnage, covered in blood, his chest heaving. The mate bond pulled him back toward the pack house with desperate urgency. Sarah. He had to get to Sarah. He found her collapsed where she had fallen, Marcus and several warriors surrounding her with expressions of helpless concern. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. The poison was working through her system, designed specifically to incapacitate powerful wolves, and even her considerable strength was not enough to fight it off. Caden dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her body, afraid to touch her and cause more pain. Through the mate bond, he felt her slipping away, felt her consciousness fading as the poison spread. The bond screamed at him to do something, to fix this, to save his mate, but he had no magic, no healing abilities beyond the normal alpha resilience that would do nothing for poison in someone else's system. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and glazed with pain. She tried to speak but only managed a whisper that Caden had to lean close to hear. She told him she was sorry, that she had not meant to bring this war to his doorstep, that she should have left before the Covenant found her. Her words were slurred, consciousness fading, and Caden felt panic claw at his throat. He told her to save her strength, that she would be fine, that he was taking her to the pack healer immediately. He gathered her into his arms as gently as possible, feeling her blood soak into his shirt, feeling her body trembling with the effort of staying conscious. The mate bond pulsed weakly between them, and for the said. First time since the rejection, Caden felt genuine terror. He could not lose her. Not now, not after finally understanding what he had rejected, what he had been too blind and proud to see. The moon goddess had given him a mate beyond measure, and he had thrown her away. Now she was dying in his arms because she had saved his life, had taken a blade meant for him, and the incomplete mate bond meant he could feel every moment of her suffering without being able to do anything to ease it. Marcus ran ahead to alert the pack healer, and Caden carried Sarah through the destroyed territory, past fires still burning and wounded wolves being tended. His pack watched him pass with expressions of shock and confusion. They had witnessed Sarah's true power, had seen their alpha fight beside her like an equal, had watched her take a blade meant for him. Everything they thought they knew about the Omega in the pack house kitchens had been revealed as elaborate fiction. The pack healer, an elderly wolf named Catherine, met them at the door to her clinic with a grim expression. She had Caden lay Sarah on the examination table and immediately began assessing the wound. The poison was advanced, she reported, designed specifically to shut down a wolf's healing abilities and attack the nervous system. It was a miracle Sarah had remained conscious as long as she had. Most wolves would have been dead within minutes of exposure. Catherine worked with swift efficiency, drawing out as much poison as possible, administering counteragents and herbs that might slow the spread. But she was honest in her assessment. The poison was beyond her ability to fully neutralize, especially in someone as powerful as Sarah. The alpha female's own considerable strength was the only thing keeping her alive, but even that would not be enough if they could not find a way to purge the toxin completely. Caden refused to leave Sarah's side, his hand wrapped around hers, the mate bond pulling at him with increasing desperation. Through the connection, he felt her fighting, felt her drawing on reserves of strength that should have been exhausted hours ago. She was struggling to survive, and he could do nothing but watch and feel her pain as though it was his own. As night deepened into the hours before dawn, Sarah's condition deteriorated. Her breathing became more labored, her heartbeat irregular, and Catherine's expression grew increasingly grave. The healer finally pulled Caden aside and told him what he already knew through the mate bond. Sarah was losing the fight. Without some miracle, some intervention beyond normal healing abilities, she would not survive until morning. Caden returned to Sarah's bedside and took her hand again, feeling how cold her skin had become, how weak her pulse felt against his fingers. The mate bond, which had been a source of pain and regret since the rejection, now felt like a lifeline connecting him to someone slipping away into darkness. He could feel her consciousness fading, feel her strength finally failing after years of suppression and hiding and fighting alone. He leaned close and spoke to her, not knowing if she could hear him, not caring if anyone else was listening. He told her he had been wrong, that his rejection had been the act of a fool too blind to see what stood before him. He admitted his pride had made him stupid, his prejudice had made him cruel, and his certainty had been nothing but ignorance, dressed in alpha authority. He told her she was magnificent, that watching her fight had been like witnessing a force of nature that she was. Everything a Luna should be and more. He confessed that the mate bond had been pulling at him since the rejection, that his wolf had known the truth even when he refused to acknowledge it, that every moment since that ceremony had been colored by the growing certainty that he had made a catastrophic mistake. He begged her to fight, to survive, to give him a chance to make this right. He promised he would help her hunt down every member of the Shadowfang Covenant, would stand beside her as she reclaimed her family's legacy, would do whatever it took to prove he understood now what he had been too blind to see before. His words hung in the quiet clinic, and Sarah's eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow and irregular. The mate bond pulsed weakly between them, and Caden felt tears he had not shed since childhood burning in his eyes. He had rejected his fated mate, and now he was going to lose her before he could even begin to make amends. Dawnlight began filtering through the clinic windows, painting everything in shades of gold that reminded Caden of Sarah's eyes when her power blazed. Catherine checked Sarah's vital signs again and shook her head slowly, her expression conveying what words could not. They were running out of time. Caden tightened his grip on Sarah's hand and felt the mate bond pulse one more time. Weak but persistent, a connection that refused to break even in the face of death. He closed his eyes, and sent everything he had through that bond. His regret, his understanding, his desperate need for her to survive. He did not know if it would make any difference, if she could even feel it through the poison clouding her system. But he had to try. The sun continued rising, painting the clinic in warm light, and Caden waited beside his dying mate. Finally, understanding exactly what he had rejected and exactly what he stood to lose forever. The poison pulled Sarah down into darkness, but she did not sink alone. The mate bond, incomplete and damaged as it was, became a tether connecting her fading consciousness to Caden's desperate awareness. As her body fought the toxins spreading through her system, her mind drifted into memory, and through the bond, Caden was dragged along with her. He found himself experiencing her past as though it were his own, the mate bond forcing him to witness what he had been too blind to see, too proud to ask about. The first memory hit him like a physical blow. Sarah at 16, hiding in a chamber beneath her family's burning home, her hands pressed against her mouth to stifle screams as she felt each member of her pack die through the bonds connecting them. The agony of those severed connections was indescribable, like having pieces of her soul torn away, one by one, leaving ragged wounds that would never fully heal. Caden experienced her terror as she huddled in the darkness for 3 days, not knowing if the attackers had left, not knowing if she was truly the last survivor. He felt her grief when she finally emerged to find nothing but ash and blood, her entire world reduced to ruins and corpses left to rot as a warning. Through her eyes, he saw the Shadowfang Covenant symbol painted in her father's blood on the walls of what had once been her home, a message that this was the price of power, of refusing to submit to their control. The memory shifted, and Caden experienced the years that followed. Sarah alone, 16 years old, trying to survive in a world that wanted her dead. He felt the constant fear, the hypervigilance that never allowed her to truly rest, the exhausting effort of suppressing her alpha nature every single moment of every single day. It was like trying to hold back a flood with bare hands, an endless battle against her own instincts and power that left her perpetually exhausted. He witnessed her learning to fight in secret, training herself in abandoned places where no one would see, pushing her body beyond normal limits because she knew the Covenant's hunters would not show mercy if they found her. He experienced the loneliness of never forming connections, never allowing herself to care about anyone because caring meant vulnerability, meant the possibility of losing someone else the way she had lost her entire family. Through the bond, Caden felt the physical pain of suppressing her nature, the constant ache in her bones, the headaches that never fully subsided, the way her wolf howled inside her, desperate to be acknowledged, to be free. For 12 years, she had lived in a cage of her own making, slowly suffocating under the weight of what she could not allow herself to be. The memories came faster now, Sarah's consciousness fragmenting under the poison's assault, and Caden experienced flashes of her life in rapid succession. He saw her arriving at Blackthorn territory 3 years ago, so exhausted she could barely stand, hoping for just a few months of peace before moving on. He felt her relief when Caden accepted her into the pack without excessive questions, her gratitude for the simple gift of a safe place to sleep. Then came the memory that made Caden's heart clench with regret so profound it felt like drowning. He experienced the moment the mate bond snapped into place from her perspective, felt the surge of hope that had flooded through her despite years of carefully maintained emotional distance. for just one perfect moment. She had allowed herself to believe that perhaps the moon goddess had not forgotten her, that perhaps after 12 years of running and hiding and loneliness, she had finally found someone who would see her, understand her, accept her completely. The mate bond was supposed to be sacred, a gift that transcended pack politics and social hierarchies. Sarah had felt it form and had dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, her years of suffering were finally over. She had imagined revealing her truth to Caden, sharing the burden she had carried alone for so long, finally having a partner who would stand beside her against the darkness. Then came the rejection ceremony, and Caden experienced it through her eyes, felt what she had felt as he stood in that sacred circle and declared her unworthy. He felt her hope shatter like glass, felt the physical pain of the incomplete bond forming even as he spoke words meant to sever it. But beneath the pain, he felt something else, a bitter resignation, an exhausted acceptance that of course this was how it would end, that of course even the moon goddess's gift would be poisoned by circumstance. Through the bond, Caden felt Sarah's thoughts during that ceremony, heard the internal dialogue she had hidden behind her mask of dignity. She had understood why he rejected her. She appeared to be an Omega with no lineage, no power, nothing to recommend her as Luna of a strong pack. His decision made logical sense from his perspective, even if it tore her apart. Part of her had even felt relief, because the rejection meant she could maintain her disguise, could stay hidden just a little longer. But the pain had been real, devastating in its intensity. The incomplete mate bond was agony, a constant reminder of what should have been, what could never be. Caden experienced her walking away from that ceremony, felt her forcing herself to maintain composure when every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to fight for what was hers, to reveal her true nature and demand he acknowledge her worth. She had not done so because she was tired, so tired of fighting, and because some small part of her believed his words. After 12 years of hiding, of suppressing everything she was, perhaps she truly was unworthy. Perhaps the covenant had been right to destroy her family. Perhaps she deserved to be alone. The memories continued, and Caden experienced her nightly trips to the forest, felt her desperate need to protect his pack even though he had rejected her. The mate bond, incomplete as it was, still connected her to Blackthorn territory in ways she could not ignore. She felt the weaknesses in the borders, sensed threats before they materialized, and could not stop herself from trying to help. It was instinct, the alpha nature she suppressed during the day, breaking free at night, demanding she protect what the mate bond insisted was hers. He experienced her exhaustion after each working, the way the magic drained her already depleted reserves, the physical cost of maintaining both her disguise and her protective wards. She was slowly killing herself, burning through strength she could not afford to lose, and she did it anyway because the alternative was watching his pack suffer, watching wolves die when she had the power to prevent it. Caden felt her conflict during the rogue attack, her desperate desire to remain hidden warring with her inability to watch innocents die. He experienced her decision to reveal herself, felt her acceptance that this would likely mean fleeing Blackthorn territory, leaving behind the first place that had felt even remotely like home in 12 years. She had chosen to save his pack anyway, had accepted the cost because it was the right thing to do, because her nature demanded she protect those weaker than herself. Through the bond, he felt her surprise when he did not immediately banish her after witnessing her power, felt her confusion at his obsessive watching in the days that followed. She had expected anger, fear, rejection. Instead, she got something she could not quite interpret, and it left her off balance in ways that 12 years of running had not. The memory of their confrontation in the forest played out, and Caden experienced her exhaustion, her resignation, as she finally told him the truth she had hidden for so long. He felt her vulnerability in that moment, the terrifying exposure of revealing herself completely, of trusting someone with knowledge that could get her killed. She had shown him everything, laid bare her past and her power, and waited for his response with a fatalism born of too many disappointments. Then came the Covenant attack, and Caden experienced her fury, her determination that she would not run anymore, would not let more innocents die because of her. He felt her fighting alongside his pack, felt the savage joy of finally being able to use her full strength without hiding, without restraint. For the first time in 12 years, she had allowed herself to be completely, utterly herself, and it had been glorious and terrifying and liberating all at once. The memory of taking the poisoned blade, meant for Caden, played out in excruciating detail. Caden experienced her split-second decision, felt her absolute certainty that she would rather die than watch her mate fall, rejected or not. The bond had demanded she protect him. Her nature had demanded she protect him, and she had not hesitated. The pain of the blade entering her shoulder was nothing compared to the pain she had already endured. What was one more wound when she had been bleeding internally for 12 years? As the poison spread through her system, Sarah's memories became fragmented, disjointed. Caden experienced flashes of consciousness, being carried in strong arms, hearing voices that seemed to come from very far away, feeling the mate bond pulsing between them like a heartbeat. He felt her fighting the poison with everything she had left, drawing on reserves that should have been exhausted years ago, refusing to die because dying meant leaving Caden alone to face the Covenant, meant abandoning the pack she had protected in secret for 3 years. But the poison was winning. Caden felt her strength failing, felt her consciousness beginning to fragment and fade. Through the bond, he experienced her acceptance of death, not welcome, but not entirely unwelcome either. She was so tired, had been tired for so long, and part of her whispered that perhaps it would be a relief to finally rest, to stop fighting, to let go of the burden she had carried since she was 16 years old. Then, through the darkness and the fading memories, she heard his voice. Caden's words reached her through the mate bond, and she felt them more than heard them. His admission of fault, his recognition of her worth, his desperate plea for her to survive. The incomplete bond carried his emotions with devastating clarity. Regret so profound it felt like drowning. Understanding that came too late, and beneath it all, a desperate need for her to live that had nothing to do with duty or obligation, and everything to do with the mate bond screaming that she was his, that losing her would break something fundamental inside him. Sarah's consciousness stirred, pulled back from the edge by the strength of Caden's emotion flooding through the bond. She had spent 12 years believing she was alone, that no one would mourn her passing, that her death would be just another footnote in the Covenant's long history of eliminating threats. But through the mate bond, she felt Caden's anguish, felt his genuine remorse, felt him finally seeing her the way she had desperately hoped he would during that rejection ceremony. It was not enough to heal the poison ravaging her system, but it was enough to give her a reason to keep fighting. The mate bond, damaged and incomplete as it was, became a lifeline she could cling to, a tether connecting her to something beyond the darkness, trying to claim her. Caden felt the shift through the bond, felt Sarah's consciousness stabilize slightly, no longer sliding inexorably toward death, but hovering in that space between life and ending. He opened his eyes to find Catherine standing over Sarah with an expression of cautious hope. The healer reported that Sarah's vital signs had stabilized, that her body seemed to be mounting a defense against the poison that should not have been possible given how advanced the toxin was. Hope surged through Caden, and he tightened his grip on Sarah's hand, pouring everything he felt through the mate bond, his regret, his understanding, his desperate need for her to survive, his promise that if she lived, he would spend however long it took proving he understood his mistake. He did not know if she could feel it, if his emotions could reach her through the poison clouding her system, but he sent them anyway. A constant stream of everything he should have felt from the beginning. Hours passed in tense silence, Catherine monitoring Sarah's condition, while Caden remained at her bedside, refusing to leave, refusing to let go of her hand. Through the windows, he watched the sun climb higher, painting the clinic in warm light that seemed to mock the desperate vigil taking place within. His pack moved outside, cleaning up the destruction from the battle, tending to wounded, but Caden could not bring himself to care about anything beyond the woman lying unconscious before him. As afternoon approached, Sarah's breathing began to even out, becoming deeper and more regular. Color slowly returned to her skin, replacing the grayish pallor that had made her look corpse-like. Catherine examined her with increasing amazement, reporting that the poison was being purged from her system at a rate that defied medical explanation. Something was helping her heal, something beyond normal werewolf resilience. Through the mate bond, Caden felt Sarah's consciousness growing stronger, felt her awareness returning in fragments. She was still deeply unconscious, her body focused entirely on healing, but she was no longer slipping away. The immediate crisis had passed, and Catherine finally allowed herself to say the words Caden desperately needed to hear. Sarah would survive. Relief hit him with such force that he had to sit down, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. The mate bond pulsed with renewed strength, and through it, he felt Sarah's presence more clearly than he had sensed the rejection. She was there, fighting her way back to consciousness, refusing to let the poison claim her. Caden remained at her bedside as day faded into evening, watching her face for any sign of waking, monitoring the bond for changes in her condition. Marcus brought reports of the pack's recovery, casualties, had been surprisingly light given the scale of the attack. The Covenant forces had been completely routed, and the territory was secure. But Caden barely heard the words. His entire focus narrowed to the woman before him and the bond connecting them. As night fell, Sarah's eyes finally fluttered open. They were unfocused at first, confused, but as awareness returned, they found Caden's face and held. Through the bond, he felt her surprise at finding him still there, felt her cautious assessment of his expression, felt her trying to understand what had changed. Caden helped her sit up slowly, supporting her weight as her body protested the movement. Catherine had left them alone, sensing this was a moment that required privacy, and the clinic was quiet except for their breathing and the pulse of the mate bond between them. Sarah's voice was hoarse when she finally spoke, asking how long she had been unconscious, what had happened after she fell. Caden told her about the battle's end, about carrying her to Catherine, about the desperate hours when they thought they would lose her. He did not tell her about experiencing her memories through the bond, about witnessing her past, and finally understanding the weight she had carried alone for so long. That knowledge felt too intimate, too raw to speak of. Yet, instead, he told her what he should have said weeks ago, what he should have realized the moment the mate bond snapped into place. He formally asked her forgiveness for his rejection, for his blindness, for his pride that had prevented him from seeing her worth. He admitted he had been wrong, catastrophically wrong, and that watching her nearly die had finally shattered the last of his foolish certainty. Sarah listened in silence, her amber eyes unreadable, and when he finished, she did not immediately respond. Through the bond, Caden felt her caution, her wariness of trusting words that came only after she had proven her value in battle. She had heard pretty speeches before, had been promised things that never materialized, and she was not inclined to accept apologies simply because they were offered. Her voice was steady despite her weakness when she finally spoke, telling him that words meant nothing, that she had learned long ago that promises were easy to make and easier to break. If he truly regretted his rejection, if he genuinely understood his mistake, he would need to prove it through actions, not speeches. Caden felt the challenge in her words, felt her testing him to see if his remorse was genuine or simply guilt born of watching her nearly die. He met her gaze directly and asked what she required of him, what proof she needed that his understanding was real. Sarah's response was immediate and uncompromising. She demanded he accept her as an equal alpha, not a submissive Luna who would defer to his authority and fade into the background. She required him to acknowledge her power, her capabilities, her right to stand beside him as a partner rather than beneath him as a subordinate. The traditional Luna role was not for her. She had been born an alpha, had survived 12 years through her own strength, and she would not diminish herself to fit into someone else's expectations. More than that, she required his help hunting down the remaining Shadowfang Covenant members who had destroyed her family. She had run from them for 12 years, had hidden and suppressed her nature to survive, but she was done running. The Covenant had taken everything from her, and she would take everything from them in return. If Caden truly wanted to prove his sincerity, he would stand beside her in this campaign, would help her reclaim her family's legacy, and ensure no other bloodline suffered the way hers had. Her demands were not requests. They were requirements, conditions that had to be met before she would even consider allowing him to complete the mate bond. She watched him with those amber eyes that had seen too much, waiting for him to balk, to hedge, to reveal that his remorse had limits after all. Caden did not hesitate. He agreed to everything without qualification, without negotiation. He would accept her as an equal alpha, would stand beside her as a partner, would help her hunt down every member of the Covenant until her family was avenged. The traditional pack structure could adapt. What mattered was that she was his mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself, and he had been a fool to reject that gift. Through the bond, he felt her surprise at his immediate acceptance, felt her cautious hope that perhaps he truly meant what he said. But she was not ready to trust completely, not yet. Trust had to be earned through consistent action, through proof that his words matched his behavior. Caden understood. He had damaged their bond through his rejection, had hurt her in ways that could not be healed with a single conversation. Rebuilding what he had broken would take time, effort, and unwavering commitment to the promises he had just made. He was prepared for that. He would spend however long it took proving he understood his mistake, proving she could trust him, proving he was worthy of the mate the moon goddess had given him. Over the following days, as Sarah recovered her strength, Caden began making good on his promises. He called a pack meeting and publicly declared Sarah his mate and equal before every member of Blackthorn Pack. He explained her true identity, her power, her years of secretly protecting their territory. He acknowledged his rejection had been wrong, born of ignorance and pride, and formally requested the pack accept her not as a traditional Luna, but as a co-alpha who would stand beside him in leadership. The pack's response was mixed. Some were shocked by the revelation. Others had suspected something after witnessing her fight during the Covenant attack. But Caden's authority was absolute, and more importantly, the pack had seen Sarah's power firsthand. They had watched her defend their territory with a ferocity that inspired respect and awe. Accepting her as co-alpha was not difficult when she had already proven herself worthy of the position. Sarah stood beside Caden during the announcement, and for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn territory 3 years ago, she did not hide her true nature. She let her alpha presence show. Let the power she had suppressed for so long radiate from her without restraint. The pack felt it and responded instinctively, recognizing the authority of an alpha female, acknowledging her right to stand beside their leader. The formal ceremony to complete the mate bond was scheduled for the next full moon, giving Sarah time to fully recover and giving Caden time to continue proving his sincerity through action. He involved her in every pack decision, deferred to her judgment on matters where her expertise exceeded his, and made it clear to everyone that she was his equal in all things. He began planning their campaign against the Shadowfang Covenant, gathering intelligence and resources, demonstrating his commitment to helping her achieve her vengeance. Through it all, the incomplete mate bond pulsed between them, no longer just a source of pain but a promise of what completion would bring. They trained together, fought together, planned together, and slowly, carefully, Sarah began to trust that perhaps this time, the hope she felt was not misplaced. The night of the full moon arrived, and once again the pack gathered in the ceremonial circle, but this time, everything was different. Sarah stood beside Caden as an acknowledged alpha, wearing ceremonial robes that marked her as his equal. The pack watched with genuine excitement rather than confused anticipation, understanding they were about to witness something rare and powerful, the bonding of two alphas. The ceremony proceeded with traditional words and rituals, but when the moment came for them to complete the bond, Caden and Sarah spoke vows they had written themselves. They promised partnership rather than hierarchy, mutual respect rather than submission, a union of equals who would face whatever came together. When they finally completed the mate bond, the energy that exploded from them made every wolf present stagger. Two alpha auras merged and amplified, creating a combined presence that was greater than the sum of its parts. Golden light blazed around Sarah, silver around Caden, and where the colors met they swirled together in patterns that seemed to defy physics. The very air hummed with power, and the pack felt their bond settle into place with a resonance that spoke of rightness, of destiny finally fulfilled. Through the completed bond, Caden and Sarah experienced each other fully for the first time. Thoughts, emotions, memories flowing between them without barrier. Caden felt Sarah's lingering caution dissolve as she experienced the depth of his remorse and commitment. Sarah felt Caden's absolute certainty that she was his equal, his partner. The other half of something he had not known was incomplete until she filled the empty space. The bond settled into place, and they stood together in the center of the ceremonial circle, two alphas united in a way that had not been seen in generations. The pack erupted in celebration, recognizing they had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that would change the very nature of Blackthorn Pack. In the days that followed, Caden and Sarah began planning their campaign against the Shadowfang Covenant in earnest. They would hunt down every member of the organization that had destroyed Sarah's family, would dismantle the power structure that had terrorized bloodlines for generations. It would be dangerous, possibly deadly, but they would face it together as partners, as equals, as mates finally united as the moon goddess had intended. Sarah had finally found home again, had finally found family in a pack that accepted her completely. Caden had discovered that true strength lay not in dominance but in partnership, that the greatest power came from standing beside someone rather than above them. As dawn broke over Blackthorn territory, they stood together on the highest point of Packlands, looking out over the forest that had witnessed so much pain and transformation. The completed mate bond hummed between them, strong and unbreakable, a connection that would sustain them through whatever battles lay ahead. Caden pulled Sarah close and whispered against her hair that rejecting her had been his greatest mistake. She turned in his arms, her amber eyes meeting his gray ones, and responded that claiming her, accepting her as his equal, had been his greatest triumph. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, two alphas united, ready to face whatever came next. The Shadowfang Covenant had taken everything from Sarah once, but they would not succeed again. This time she had a partner, a mate, a pack, and together they were unstoppable. The future stretched before them, uncertain and dangerous, but for the first time in 12 years, Sarah felt hope that was not tinged with fear. For the first time since becoming Alpha, Caden felt complete, as though a piece he had not known was missing had finally slotted into place. Together, they would forge something new, a partnership of equals, a bond that transcended traditional pack structures, a union that would reshape what it meant to lead. The moon goddess had given them to each other for a reason, and though the path had been painful, the destination was worth every moment of struggle. As they turned to face their pack, their territory, their future, the mate bond sang between them with a strength that promised they would never face darkness alone again.